All right, things just seem to have leveled off a little bit, so we'll go ahead and get started. Again, welcome everyone to our Economic Innovation Group's OZ webinar series. We are back after a brief hiatus over the summer and excited to be back and kicking off our series again with this topic on continued efforts to build local capacity in opportunity zones. We're excited to have a couple of guest speakers with us today, as well as our moderator, Rachel Riley from Aces and Archers. We'll also be joined by Robin Shabes from the Chicagoland Opportunity Zone Consortium, as well as Ray Daphner from Opportunity Appalachia. So excited to have this star lineup for this discussion today. Amelia, if you can go to the next slide. I already preempted this. We went over who our speakers are. Before we get into the agenda a bit, I will note just a couple of housekeeping items. One, this webinar is being recorded. We will post the recording, the slides, and a recap of this discussion on our website within the next few weeks. So for everyone who has registered, it will be in your inbox as soon as that is available. And also we will be reserving some time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. So over the course of the presentations, if you want to add in your questions, please do so using the Q&A function. The chat is great if you just want to say hi, but often a lot of the chatter it's a little bit easier for some questions to get lost. So please use the Q&A function if you have questions for us or for one of the presenters, and we can either answer those in real time if it lends it to that, or we'll make sure to reserve some time at the end for those questions. All right, so we'll start off with some updates on Opportunity Zones resources and market updates. We will then go into the topic overview, the presentations from our guest speakers, and then the Q&A, as I mentioned. So go to the next slide, thanks. All right, so in terms of Opportunity Zones resources and market updates, so Novogradac, as many of you may know, the Novogradac accounting firm puts out regularly an Opportunity Zones investment report. They have a real growing list of opportunity funds as part of their directory, and they survey those funds with regularity to get a better sense of how much money has been raised through those opportunity funds, as well as deployed, and what the focus of those funds are, both from a geographic standpoint as well as from kind of an asset class, where they're putting their investments essentially. And so Novogradac recently came out last month with data through the end of Q2 through June 30th, 2022. They noticed that the increase in investment since December 31st end of last year, was the second most for any period in which Novogradac has tracked opportunity fund investment, trailing only the final 6 months of 2021, which was certainly expected given the kind of deadline related to the step up in basis benefit at the end of last year. So interesting that even with that benefit kind of sunsetting, based at least on the current legislation or the current law, the investment still continues to see increases there. So that was interesting to see. Good to see in the terms of additional findings. So 1,000, almost 1,100 of the opportunity funds have raised $30.9 billion. Anyone from Novogradac who usually presents these findings will always say that they anticipate that this is about, the market as in actuality is about 3 to 4 times the size of what they're able to estimate based on the subset of funds that they are able to access through their survey. About 75% of those opportunity funds have a geographic focus. About 70% of those funds are single asset opportunity funds. And 62.5% of funds are funds of $10 million or less. So interesting also to see the real range of fund sizes, which they do have some funds that are $500 million and more in size, but as you can see here, the vast majority of funds that they are tracking are less than $10 million. In terms of the opportunity zones legislation, we have done a few webinars on this, or mentioned this certainly in the webinar since its introduction in April of 2022. But this legislation would improve upon the existing policy in a few key ways. The first is to establish reporting requirements for opportunity funds and investors, as well as mandate an annual report to Congress, kind of noting some top line takeaways from where funds are operating, where they're investing, what type of assets they're investing in, and other information that will just be very helpful for us to get a really complete sense of the market. Right now, we have private sector folks like Novogradac and others who are doing their best and what they can to track market activity, but obviously that's incomplete without a federal mandate to do that, and to kind of collate that data together and present that to Congress and to the public. And so it's really important for us to get a better sense of what's going on, how this is all working, and how it could potentially be improved in a future iteration. So that reporting will be very important to the policy and to the future of policy. The legislation also would extend the deferral and the benefit to the end of 2028. Currently, that deadline is the end of 2026. And it would also do a few other things, include allow for fund-to-fund investments. It would establish a state and community dynamism fund that would allow for additional kind of technical assistance and resources for redevelopment capital and other types of really helpful capital to help communities really take advantage of opportunity zones and put together a thoughtful strategy on how to really leverage this policy to help accomplish their economic development goals. Finally, it would also limit or early sunset a small percentage of zones that are higher income and allow governors to choose zones in replacement that are lower income communities to replace those tracts. So again, it's a very small percentage of the overall map. Generally, the map is very well targeted and governors did an excellent job at that. However, there were a few that are higher income, and so the legislation would seek to replace those with lower income communities that are more aligned with the intent of the incentive, while also providing some treatment of pre-existing investments and rules around that. I think that covers the legislation. Happy to answer any questions about that more in the Q&A. So in terms of recent opportunity zone stories, a few that we wanted to highlight from the last couple of months. The first is Arteris Impact Investors, who are regular regular webinar guests. They issued their 2021 impact report. Really well done in terms of their OZ impact evaluation and just putting some helpful visuals there to really help quantify their work, and especially how it pertains to opportunity zone investments and the impact those investments are having on the communities. That work was conducted by ICIC, who we are also in touch with. So if that's of interest to you all, if you either work with funds that might be interested in that, or if you are a fund that is interested in showing your impact, let us know. We'd be happy to provide that information to you on the firm that is helping to think through some of that with impact-oriented investors. Another news in Bank of America launched grants to support underserved businesses in select cities. So these would be kind of down payment grants offered in opportunity zones, specifically in Atlanta, Chicago, Charlotte, Dallas, and Los Angeles. There's plans to expand that next year, but the geography is very specific to opportunity zones in those cities. So it's really, I think, always positive to see opportunity zones and that geography being used in other use cases. And so this is one of the more recent ones, and I think hopefully a very impactful program. The next is the Revity. It was formerly RevOz, which also has been on the webinar before, talking about some of their interesting projects, particularly the San Bernardino Medical Center that they helped to finance through OZ Equity. They are launching their fourth fund now, and that's focused on emerging cities that have kind of been traditionally overlooked by institutional capital. And they are aiming for a $150 million fund and launching fundraising for that. And then finally, I think just a great article in the Sacramento Observer about the benefits of opportunity zones in a recessionary economy. I think the quote there that's included on the slide really kind of sums it up. And also quotes from a Caliber, Chris Loeffler there doing excellent work out in Arizona. And some of his recommendations in the current kind of economic circumstances, thinking about existing investments in addition to kind of ground up investments and developments, and taking stock of those opportunities in addition to the ground up plays, but really taking stock of existing properties and how they might be able to be eligible for OZ capital, and that being a particularly potentially good opportunity here in the current economy. So I think that takes us through the updates. I know that we typically put those in the chat. So as soon as I'm finished presenting here, I will put links to all of the articles that I just went through and make sure that everyone's got that in the chat there. So I think though I will hand it over to Rachel to take it from here.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. For whatever reason, my chat was not letting me send those links out. So appreciate you doing that. Well, welcome everyone. I hope you guys had a good summer. We are excited. This is going to be the first of, I think, 3 or 4 webinars we're going to do to run us through the end of the year. And we thought it would be a great place to start, just kind of taking a look back at some of the efforts that have occurred over the last couple of years to help build local capacity and opportunity zones, and to sort of baseline on that, but then also talk about the continued need for those efforts and how some lead organizations are endeavoring to that end. So just as a quick, again, baselining note, many folks may remember that back in 2018, 2019, there were a number of local and regional initiatives that were launched to help prepare communities. And that was really around technical assistance, capacity building needed so that those communities and the community leaders could leverage and take advantage of opportunity zone investments and attract those investments to their community for high impact projects and aligned priorities. A lot of this leadership came from local government as well as nonprofits. And when I say nonprofits, it really runs the gamut, all shapes and sizes. So CDFIs, local and national organizations, et cetera, even universities, I would say. And most of these efforts were supported either by philanthropic funding or government grants. We can go to the next slide. Again, as many of you may remember, just off the top of my head, there were a handful of initiatives throughout the nation. EIG made efforts to map some of these initiatives. You can find those on the OZ activity map, but many are familiar, of course, with Opportunity Alabama, Invest Acadiana, Opportunity Riverside. We had Fuse Fellows that were located in communities throughout the nation, as well as OZ coordinators. Smart Growth America also had a cohort of communities they were working with. There were local conferences, investor summits, development of prospectus documents, as well as investment playbooks. And we really saw a lot of that activity sort of dwindle down around 2020. And I think largely due to the pandemic, but also because at that point, the market was really starting to be in its early stages of formation. I would say another reason is that a lot of the funding was term limited. So it was only for a year or 2 years. And once funding ran out, we kind of saw these efforts, I don't want to say dwindle, but they reduced in scope and scale, or maybe reoriented themselves to focus mostly on the pandemic, but be inclusive of opportunity zones. Yep, thanks. Just to let everyone know, there's still a continued need, and I'm hearing this almost daily, a continued need for that sort of technical assistance, especially around project development. And project development being pre-development activities, all the way through construction management, mostly also around capital stacking, how to attract capital to projects, where does OZ investment fit into the deal, how do we get in touch with OZ investors. So that is still very much needed. And it's definitely needed as the market continues to grow. As Catherine mentioned, Novogradic's numbers show that investment volume has not leveled off and will likely continue to grow. And so as more money is entering the marketplace, we still need these local leaders to be tasked and empowered with helping guide that money to the right places in my mind. So the most high need communities and the most high impact projects. We're encouraged, the legislation that Catherine mentioned earlier includes the state and local Dynamism fund. We do see this as a potential resource for funding the continuance of initiatives or new initiatives. Of course, that is all still up in the air, but wanted to point you all to that as a potential new source of capital to help ramp up these efforts again, as they will be needed in the future, especially if the market continues to grow and there is an extension. With that, I also want to mention two more things that aren't on the slides, two resources I want to share. Purdue launched a Rural Opportunity Zone initiative a few years ago and went through 2 cohorts at least, and they had posted lessons learned from that effort. So I want to direct folks to those lessons learned because I think that that's interesting. And then I saw today that Sorensen published its new version of the Rural Opportunity Zones and Recovery Playbook. So that could also be of help as you all are either reimagining or re-envisioning where your engagement could be in opportunity zones moving forward. We are really excited to have 2 guest speakers today, as Catherine mentioned, who are, in the thick of it. They have run very successful local initiatives for opportunity zones, and they're here to talk about their 2022, 23, 24 strategy for continuing this work. And there's some real great alignment between the 2 guest speakers, but before saying much more, I do want to turn it over to Robin from Chicago Community Loan Fund, who is at the helm of the Chicagoland Opportunity Zones Consortium. Robin?
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel and Catherine, for inviting me to participate in today's webinar. I'm really excited to talk with you all. As you heard, I'm the director of something called the Chicagoland Opportunity Zones Consortium. So what I'm going to share with you today are a few things. You might find it interesting in terms of how we came to be, who are our members, the role we play. I'll share a little bit of information about our local landscape, talk about some of our accomplishments since we've been in business starting in 2020, and then talk about where we're currently focusing for 2022, 2023, and all of that is based on lessons learned to date. Next slide. I thought that to start out, you need some context in terms of what's happening regarding OZs here in Illinois. And this slide is showing you that just within Cook County, so the city of Chicago is located in Cook County. The Chicagoland OZ Consortium's purview is the city of Chicago and suburban Cook. So just in that small geography in comparison to the state as a whole, we have almost 56% of the state's opportunity zones located within that footprint. And you can see from the slides that the majority of those OZs are located within the city of Chicago. And then suburban Cook has OZs across several of its municipalities. One point I do want to make, and I know that you've heard a little bit about this in other webinars, but for the state of Illinois, the city of Chicago and suburban Cook County, all of those local government leaders really stayed true to the intent of the legislation. And so that is indeed our footprint in where we focus. Next slide. So the consortium is a collaborative. We're not our own separate 501c3 entity. I'm actually physically housed in the Chicago Community Loan Fund, which is a CDFI. So the consortium is a collaborative of about 30 entities. And what you see on the screen is just a representation of who those entities are. But essentially our members include all types of capital providers, whether they are CDFIs who operate within the city of Chicago and the Midwest footprint, banks, banks, but we also have philanthropic partners, supporters of the consortium, and that includes McCormick Foundation, MacArthur Foundation, Chicago Community Trust, Chase Foundation. We have many nonprofits, and we also have some private sector organizations, including an OZ family office that operates within our footprint. The reason I am housed at CCLF is because this idea incubated out of this CDFI. And when the legislation was still relatively new, there were questions within our particular community about how could organizations work together to truly leverage this new tool in our toolbox, combined with all the other tools that all of us who work in community and economic development are familiar with. We're mission focused, and that means we want to pay attention to equitable development, local job creation, community wealth building. And so we formally launched in 2020 and had a plan in place before I actually was brought on board. Next slide. The consortium focuses on its core role of being a matchmaker between understanding the pipeline of business and real estate development opportunities within our footprint, and where we see feasibility of those opportunities, trying to match them with OZ investors. We do a lot of education and guidance around the tool. We created a pilot program for technical support because we saw that that is indeed what's needed in our footprint and is very much in demand in terms of what folks want to hear about as it relates to this tool. We also serve as a central repository, since we know that the current legislation does not require any one governmental entity to collect the data around what's happening across the many footprints where OZs are located. We are now that repository of information within our footprint based on the relationships of our members, word of mouth, having solidified ourselves as the go-to resource. Next slide. So this is a high-level example of what's happening in our footprint. This slide is telling you that we have many different types of OZ opportunities on the left side, and on the right side, we have many, many different types of investors. And so what I like to say about this slide is diversity is the key to understanding this slide. We have diversity of opportunities, business or real estate. We have a diversity of investors that runs the gamut from family offices to institutional capital to Fortune 500 companies that have invested OZ capital to single asset funds. So quite a bit of diversity across the types of investors who are interested in our footprint. And then lastly, we have diversity in the number and location of zones within our footprint. Next slide. So this is a slide that is showing you the different types of completed investments that have happened in Chicagoland, and it covers many things. So, you know, Pullman Park, there was a corporate OZ investor that was willing and interested in wanting to invest in this very far south Chicago community. The developer was Ryan Companies combined with a CDFI and a community development organization to create over 500,000 square feet of needed distribution and warehouse space. That is certainly an asset within our footprint in that part of Chicagoland. The next project is a combination of a commercial office building, mixed use, along an underutilized commercial corridor, but near a health center that is very actively engaged in the community. That particular OZ investor happened to be a bank that was investing their own OZ capital. The terminal project is a family office investor, and this is the transformation, adaptive reuse of a former lamp factory into this campus for creators, makers, and innovators. And lastly, we were fortunate to have Verte OZ, a seed stage investor that was looking for different types of businesses, and RiseKit is one of those businesses that's in our footprint that created a very innovative tech platform that is all around helping job seekers and underserved communities find and stay in fulfilling careers through a variety of resources. Next slide. These are some examples of the different types of zones within our footprint. For some reason, I think folks sometimes forget that, being in the middle of the country, we actually do have opportunities for investment. And I'm here to say that we have lots of different zone examples. In this particular case, we are fortunate to have a 500-acre medical district called the Illinois Medical District, where we have many of the city and regions top healthcare providers located within this particular footprint. But of that 500 acres, 31 are located within opportunity zones. And this is an innovation center district. It allows for quite a bit of FAR development, flexible mixed use office, retail lab, et cetera, as well as residential. And so for those of you who are investors listening to this particular webinar, we have 2 active OZ opportunities within this footprint. Next slide. This is also a very cutting edge development project that is coming down the pike. This is the redevelopment of the former Michael Reese Hospital site. It is located along the banks of Lake Michigan and coming from a legacy city where most of our geography is built out. This is a very rare opportunity to see new development and adaptive reuse of some of the properties that formerly made up a vacant medical campus. Here, the focus is on health and wellness. It's going to be an innovation-focused district. And again, we have quite a few early stage or investment opportunities within this footprint. One of those that is coming down the pike is based on the Shiva Medical Center ARC model, which is an innovation model to take research that's coming out of a world-class healthcare institution and transforming it in a way that it can be rolled out and accessible and transformative when it comes to healthcare. It's an open innovation model. So again, if you are interested in learning more about these opportunities, certainly let's talk. Next slide. The last zone I'm sharing is an example of a historic corridor. It used to be known for, it's called Motor Row, so it's pretty obvious what the previous land uses were in this location. As you can see from this slide, it is in close proximity to downtown Chicago, but it is adjacent to the McCormick Place Convention Center. So if you've been to Chicago, you've been to McCormick Place, then you have a general sense of what's happening in this vicinity. Here we have many, many different types of economic development incentives available, which overlap with the O zones. So again, a very fortuitous location if you're interested in wanting to be part of Chicago's OZ landscape. Next slide. So what we accomplished in our first 2 years, starting in 2020, the reason that folks came together is because we have many community development organizations and CDFIs, and it made more sense from this group's perspective to work collectively, collaboratively, so that there was essentially one voice that was speaking about the opportunities here, making sure that we are doing a good job with education around the tool, providing the types of technical assistance resources that are needed to understand how to use this tool, and making sure that we could communicate to the rest of the world what's happening in our footprint. So we went from a very distributed ecosystem to a collaborative ecosystem in our first 2 years. Next slide. So here we are in this new collaborative ecosystem. Our goal for the next 2 years is to be even more intentional about increasing impact using this particular tool. We want to see more investments closed with OZ equity. We're creating some new tools, and there are some now new incentives like the Bank of America tool that just came into play that is going to be focused on OZs. We want to make sure that we're intersecting with national players in addition to our local and regional players, and where we can have a voice in helping to strengthen the enabling environment to help support development within our opportunity zones. That's a role that we will continue to play in the next 2 years. Next slide. So this is my last slide, and this is showing you what our work plan looks like at the very highest level for 2022 and 2023. And so you can see that we will continue with our ongoing core activities, which I talked about, but we have 4 prioritized areas in terms of what we want to focus on, whether it's highlighting investment-ready transactions, widening the net to increase impact, talking about some of the new tools. But this slide is representative of the lessons that we learned in our first 2 years. So I already shared with you that we have a diverse group of investors wanting to work in our ecosystem. We have lots of diversity in the types of projects, but that doesn't mean that we don't still need new investor pathways to really match up with the types of opportunities that we have across these 183 different opportunity zones in Chicagoland. We know that there is a continued need to help provide resources to businesses, to developers, investors. Doesn't matter if you're a more experienced developer. Not everybody really understands the opportunity to use opportunity zone incentives. So having all types of guidance activities and technical support is really needed to really be able to help democratize access to this tool and help to move forward projects that would otherwise not come to fruition without this particular incentive. And then lastly, we just want to make sure that we get the word out like EIG does every day, and Rachel and Catherine are great about talking about why this tool is so important and how impactful it can be, certainly if used in the way that it was intended to be used. So I will stop there and defer back to Rachel.
Yeah, thank you so much, Robin. It's always such a great opportunity to get an update on the lessons learned from the prior year's activities, and then how those lessons are informing the strategic priorities moving forward. And so I really appreciate you as a practitioner and local leader outlining how you're thinking about this and going about it over the next couple of years. So thanks so much. Are there any questions for Robin? I think we can take one question and then we can hop over to Ray.
I haven't seen anything come through just yet. So just a reminder that I hope everyone's chat capabilities are enabled from a panelist perspective, or rather from an attendee perspective too. If not, just please go ahead and use the Q&A function, and hopefully that'll be the easier way to collect questions.
Sounds good, thank you. So Robin, I guess if there's no questions now and folks can think about questions and as Catherine mentioned, type them in the Q&A. I guess I just have one question. I know we've talked about it before, but maybe it'll be helpful for others. What are the priority activities in Chicagoland right now as far as investment types or assets? What is the nut that you guys have not been able to crack? Is it more housing? Is it in the more suburban areas? Is it commercial corridors? How would you describe that?
Sure. So I will say a couple of things. Our suburban Cook County opportunity zones are larger scale tracts of land, which are really more designed for large scale development, whether it's transportation, logistics, distribution. So that's going to be a different type of OZ investor and developer. When it comes to the city of Chicago, a lot of our OZs overlap with the city of Chicago's Invest Southwest initiative, and just like it sounds, it's focused on the West Side neighborhoods and the South Side neighborhoods. And these areas are much more likely to see development that's either residential in nature, if it's inside the residential portion of that neighborhood or that community area, or it's going to be commercial corridor development that can be mixed use, but it's not going to be thousands of units or multi-million square feet of space. So for us, attracting and wanting to attract investors who are interested in those types of opportunities that are maybe the 40 to 50 million total project cost range, or maybe it's mixed income housing or workforce housing. That's where we're focused. And sometimes it's a little bit harder to attract the attention of investors who are not within the Chicagoland footprint to take the time to look at what we have, to offer. We certainly have feasible opportunities and diversity in those zones to offer investors a return on their capital and the return of their capital.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Robin. And I'm sure that resonates with a lot of others that are on the webinar today. So appreciate that. And while you were speaking, there was one question that did come in. Do you know of similar agencies in other areas such as Georgia or South Carolina? So organizations that are doing similar work in those communities?
So I do think there are a few organizations across the nation. I'm not sure there's anything exactly like the Chicagoland Opportunity Zones Consortium, because our footprint is a smaller footprint. Other organizations like the one you'll hear Ray talk about in our presentation today is, I believe, statewide or certainly regionally focused. But there are other types of organizations out there that are somewhat similar, and would be happy to follow up with you offline and share what we know about. We did a lot of research before the consortium was created to see what kinds of examples were out there.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Robin. So we are going to transition to Ray Daphner, who's going to talk about Opportunity Appalachia. And before Ray gets started, I do want to note, and it's a point of pride for me coming from the CDFI industry at one point in my career, that both of our guest speakers are representing initiatives that are born or hosted by community development financial institutions, which was something that I know the economic and community development sector really saw their role in facilitating these conversations and these initiatives, and trying to figure out a way to plug into the Opportunity Zones marketplace in a way that is aligned with their mission and their goals. So happy to continue involvement from CDFIs. So Ray, I will turn it over to you, and I think we can advance 2 slides. Yep. Great, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Rachel and Robin. Wonderful to hear about your efforts. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to talk a little bit about an effort we're undertaking in rural Appalachia, in a 5-state region in central Appalachia, Ohio, West Virginia, Tennessee, and North Carolina. And as Rachel mentioned, this effort is led by a CDFI, actually a regional wholesale CDFI called Appalachian Community Capital, that has about 23 CDFIs as its members that have well over $1 billion in capital. And what we've done is we've partnered with regional organizations in each of our target markets, and you can see those local economic development partners, as well as with national organizations like Main Street America, to help bring skill and financing to relatively small communities. And as I move forward in this discussion, you'll see that a lot of the towns we're working with have 5,000 people, have 7,000 people, and their hours are more from major metropolitan centers. So these are places that are tough to work in. And let's go to the next slide. And so what we do is we provide technical support to these project sponsors to help develop opportunities and create quality jobs and have significant impact in these areas. And so we are currently working with over 50 different communities in the 5-state region. We have raised a technical assistance pool of over $3 million, and we are well on our way to spending a substantial chunk of that money to help get these transactions investment ready. And these transactions are looking to raise over $400 million, which again, in these small communities, that's a lot of money. Let's go to the next slide. So what we do is we identify downtown development projects, manufacturing projects, health, med and ed related activities, food systems, heritage tourism projects that align with those communities' priorities, that align with those communities' strategic plans. And why don't we go to the next slide? And we look for places, as I mentioned, that are particularly hard to work with. So in our central Appalachian footprint, not only are we looking for communities in those geographies, but we're looking for particularly economic distressed communities, or those that have persistent poverty, or in addition to meeting OZ requirements, also meet new markets or other types of requirements. Let's go to the next slide. And what we do is we, with our local partners, run a kind of an open solicitation process where communities apply for participation. And we select communities to participate based on these types of criteria. We want to have high impact projects that are going to create jobs or provide services to these communities. I mentioned before that are going to align with their existing strategies. We want to make sure that there's capacity there in these communities to pull these things off. What we find is that a lot of places that we work, they are looking for grants. And so that's what they're used to doing. They're looking to get grant money. Rural America does a lot of that. And we're looking for investments. So projects that are grant-only projects are not projects that we work with and participate with, but projects that can have a blended capital stack where grants or other soft monies, tax credits can help fill a gap in the capital stack, but also bring in other types of financing. So next slide. So what we do is we provide a whole menu of services. And what I would mention is these services are not provided by our staff. We have over 100 consulting organizations, architects, financial services providers, CPAs, market research firms that we work with and that have been identified and pre-vetted to participate in these efforts. And so what we're trying to do is for a particular project, identify what their unique gaps are to get them to be able to raise capital. So we provide support for teams to help develop investment prospectus and to do financial structuring and financial projections. We work with a number of architects and engineering firms. Environmental assessments are also a part of this. Developer solicitation can also be important. Many times the project sponsors don't have the capacity, the wherewithal to actually develop the project. And in those cases, we can either look for a fee developer or the piece of real estate could be sold to a developer. And then of course, there's a lot of investor outreach that goes on as well. So let's go to the next slide. Let's go forward one more, and then we're going to skip back. So we work with probably 30 or 40 different types of investors, whether those are CDFIs or opportunity zone investors. We work with new markets tax credit funds, historic tax credit investors, a number of banks, and of course, public sector partners and philanthropies. And so some of these are regional and some of these are national. So the way we've positioned ourselves in this work is we work with local economic development organizations to help identify where the opportunities are and to help identify credible transactions that can move forward. And then we have relationships with a range of investment partners, and we can try to mix and match and bring those two together. So let's go back one more slide. Yeah, and so we do that in a couple of different ways. We do that internally through our team. Of course, the project sponsors themselves often have great relationships with either high net worth individuals in their communities or local banks. And then the technical assistance teams that we bring on board also have tremendous relationships. And then we also hold an investor convening event. And we've done one of these in 2021, and we'll do another one in 2023, where the projects that we're working with actually provide pitches. And we try to do a little matchmaking for transactions that haven't already lined up financing. Let's go forward 2 slides. So just to give you a sense of the kind of transactions that we're working with. So this is from our first round of projects. We have 5 projects that have closed or are closing on financing at about 50 million at this point. I would say only one of those has raised OZ capital. So I mentioned that we're really agnostic about the type of capital that supports these opportunities. And so we have new markets tax credit investment and historic and bank debt and CDFI debt and public sector grants and philanthropic support. So just as an example, the Cohen building, the second one there, in Grafton, West Virginia, a town with a population of 7,000 people, interesting project sponsor. It's a local business that is trying to help improve that downtown. And so it's got a slice of community facility to it because there are going to be some nonprofit tenants, but there are also for-profit anchor tenants. And it's a $10 million project in a town of 7 million people. And it's a new market transaction. So there's a new markets fund, there are leverage lenders and construction lenders, very, very complex transaction to put together, working on it for about 2 years at this point, but it might close this month, should close this year. On a completely different note, Vaughn Furniture, Galax, Virginia, and again, another very small town, huge furniture manufacturer years back, a couple 100,000 square feet of this old furniture manufacturing facility that the family wants to put to better use for this community. So with work of an architect and some project support team have identified a significant project, a $92 million project. The city has solicited a developer. They've accepted that developer's offer. The owners are now looking at structuring a partnership or sale with that developer. A chunk of this will be housing. Clearly, a project of this size in a community that small will be undertaken in phases, but substantial use of historic tax credits in this project as well. So those are just some examples. And then just to move forward one more slide, we are currently working with 34 new projects that we just selected this year. 18 of these projects are in opportunity zones. And again, quite a range of these projects. This top one will be a twin new markets historic transaction, community facility with workforce development and tech support for businesses. Second project is fascinating private business that manufactures fans, and its constraint on output is primarily its labor force in this very small town called Grundy, Virginia. So they want to build and set up a daycare center. So looking at both financing for that and the technical assistance to help them set up a licensed daycare facility so they can create more jobs in this community. And then just lastly, I'll mention there's a interesting business actually working with 2 of these meat processing facilities, slaughterhouses and packaging companies, one in Western North Carolina, one in Eastern Tennessee. And so again, looking at different ways to raise capital for them, help them with their business planning processes, their market assessments. So let's go forward one more slide. That's just a map of where these projects are. One of the things that we do is we really try to connect these projects. So we hold typically quarterly meetings where the project sponsors are providing updates on their activities. And they really learn from each other as well, not just from their technical assistant teams, but how did communities in these very challenging markets in economically distressed areas, how did they overcome what they're facing? And these are very different types of project sponsors. You have nonprofit CDCs and you have municipalities and private businesses. So it's a really interesting learning process. Next slide. So our investors who have supported this program are those listed here. And I think that these organizations have really helped lend a good bit of credibility to this effort too. So when we reach out to investors and talk about this group of funders, that's a positive foot forward. When we work in the communities that we're working in, we again discuss the types of funders who have bet on this approach. Really, helps get their attention. And similarly, when we work with our pool of 100 technical assistance providers, they're quite interested in that as well. So we're excited to be doing this work. I think in terms of lessons learned, one thing I'll share with you are that investors have said to us, investors out of New York City have said to us, we had no idea there were deals like this in Appalachia. We can't believe it. Thank you so much. And I think from a perspective like that, getting a credible technical assistance team, we work with folks like the National Development Council and regional architects and national CPA firms. Getting really strong development teams together really can increase that investor interest. And I think another type of comment that we hear, another lessons learned, are that we have people in rural Appalachia who say there are no deals here. We can't do anything. There's no deals here. And so when we can put forward 17 transactions from 2 years ago and 34 transactions from right now, over 50 deals that are seeking $400 million and are going to create thousands of jobs, people can't say that anymore because we can point to them. And we can point to exactly what these transactions need in order to get financed. So I think it helps change the conversation both internally in rural communities and externally among investors. And our hope is that this work will bring more capital to the underserved portions of rural Appalachia. I think that might be it. There's our web link. We have all sorts of information on our web link. As a shout out to CDFIs, I will have very important to mention that the CEO of Appalachian Community Capital is Donna Gambrell, and Donna is the former director of the CDFI fund under President Obama. So it's just been wonderful to have Donna lead this effort, and wonderful to work with all of our local partners and regional partners.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ray. We love Donna. We've had her on, I think at least once. And I don't know if we want to go back to that slide that we just advanced from, because there is that link. I know folks can't click on it now, but maybe we can drop it in the chat just so everyone can be directed to the 2022 and 2024 effort for Opportunity Appalachia. Ray, if I could just sort of not editorialize, but maybe summarize where Opportunity Appalachia is that this was an initiative that was specific in its inception to opportunity zones. You all went through the first iteration and then realized, just based on your lessons learned, that perhaps this could be broadened to be more about economic development, community development, with opportunity zones as a tool that could be leveraged, but not the tool to be focused on. Is that how your progression has been?
Yeah, absolutely, Rachel. Our first cohort were 100% in opportunity zones, but we understood that a range of different financing components would be needed to make these deals work. So when we did our second cohort, which was this year, we loosened that exclusivity to having to be located in an opportunity zone, but over half of the transactions are located in OZs. I think just in terms of OZ QOF investment specifically, some of the challenges we find are that these transactions need so much subsidy that in certain cases, the OZ rates of return can be such that it can be challenging to work with. So we do have examples where local OZ investors, they're really looking at this from a civic-minded perspective, and they're looking at social return on investment, and they're not looking at market return for their QOF. And so, that's a great approach. And
one of the things that I have also heard, and I think it goes to just the broader need, across the nation, not just in Appalachia, not just in Chicago, just everywhere, is that there's a real vacuum when it comes to folks who understand how to blend or marry OZ financing with the traditional tax credit programs. And we know it can be done, but when project sponsors are maybe making a perceived choice between pursuing tax credits, which provide subsidy to the deal, versus opportunity zone financing, they're of course going to pursue the tax credit deal. But if there's a, if there are more people in the field who understood how to marry those two, that maybe there would be potentially more OZ financing in these tax credit deals. And we've covered that in previous webinars, and it definitely can be done. It just takes someone with some practice in doing that. So I definitely, it's just my call to the marketplace and to service providers. Like, we really need that as a skill set within the industry.
That would be great, Rachel. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll get off my soapbox. I see that there's some questions that have come in. I just want to note to Edward, who, thank you so much for engaging during the webinar. The second question you asked around foreign direct investment and visas, I don't think I'm qualified to answer. If others are qualified to answer that, feel free to respond directly to Edward, but just want you to know that we're not skipping or ignoring you. It's just, I don't want to give you an off the cuff answer that's not correct. We do have another question from Sarah, and I think this is directed towards Ray. Were most of your rural projects reuse projects that included tax credits?
I think of our portfolio, a third to a half use tax credits, but they all need some type of subsidy. So just the real question is, what subsidy is a fit? And, sometimes it's a state or federal grant subsidy. To use a new market subsidy, you've got to be a pretty big transaction. So if you're a $2 or $3 million transaction, that doesn't work. If you're looking at historic tax credits, well, you have to be approved. You have to be a historic facility, or if it's a housing project, and I'd say only 10 or 15% of our projects are housing, and you want to use LIHTC, well, how do you blend that in terms of mixed income? I think the issue is less around tax credits. The issue is, how do you stack a transaction so that the appropriate subsidies in place, so that they can go forward in these very challenging communities.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know that Sarah's working in, I don't want to say rural Indiana, but probably seeing similar challenges. Catherine, are you seeing anything coming in, or were there prompt questions or anything relayed to you directly?
No, I think everything that I've seen come through for the Q&A has been is in the Q&A box. I think we've answered just about everything.
Mm-hmm.
Could I just add on to what you were just talking about, Rachel and Ray? I think there is tremendous value in having technical assistance or technical guidance available to businesses or developers, because matching capital stack, whether you have grants that you're proceeding with, or you want to take advantage of new market tax credits or low-income housing tax credits and OZ, there's value in the technical assistance that qualified providers can provide to really help businesses and or developers understand their pro formas and understand how those incentives will be categorized when you're doing your accounting. So I can't stress enough the importance of technical assistance guidance programs. I know that for our pilot TA program, we match smaller scale developers and small businesses with a variety of OZ experts, whether they were CPAs or tax attorneys. And what we heard from all of the participants was that was invaluable in helping them to understand how to position their businesses or their projects. Not all of them were interested at the end of the day in pursuing OZ, but all of them found value in having that technical expertise to guide them through making those decisions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Robin. And to that point exactly, and to points that Ray had made prior, I think it's so important to just continue to drive home the fact that as an ecosystem building effort, that the work is not done. I hear often, or just there may be the sentiment that, we took 2 years at the beginning to get everyone fully read in on what opportunity zones are and how to engage in them. I think that was definitely a needed effort, but we have to understand that not everyone knows what an opportunity zone is, even today, or what the policy actually supports, or how to best build capacity around them. And these communities, by definition, are underserved, undercapitalized, maybe limited capacity communities that aren't going to have maybe that sort of level of business advisory services or technical support readily available to them. So it's just continue to be important. It will continue to be important that we try to reach as many people as possible and not just make assumptions, that everyone who wants to know about OZs knows about OZs, and everyone who wants to do development or make investments, they have what they need to make those decisions. I think there's a phantom market of folks who want to engage and maybe just don't have the resources they need to do so. So let's get that state and local dynamism fund passed, Catherine.
Passed. Well, thank you so much. I know that we are at time. Thank you to Ray and to Robin for joining us. This was a really fantastic presentations. Thanks for everyone for attending and engaging with us. As I mentioned at the top, we will have this recording, a recap, and the slides posted on our website in the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned for that, and you'll get an email of that information as well. Rachel, anything I missed or?
No, not for me. If you just messaged me, I can't respond right now, but my email is rachel@acesandarchers.com. So if you could just follow up, that would be great.
Sounds great. All right. Well,
Great.
thanks everyone, and we'll see you next month.